G'day everyone, welcome to the Outback Packers podcast, the podcast where two mates from all the way across the world have a yarn talking Packers football and the green and gold. I'm Nick Gregory, once again with my co-host Iowa Joe, today joined by special guest, co-host of the Freezer podcast, Fred Thurston. Fred, it's amazing to have you on. How are you?
Good, man. Thank you so much for having me on. That's probably the most unique intro I've ever been on with any show I've ever been on. I've never had a good day, mate. I've never had anything. So that was really cool. I enjoyed that.
No, good. I love to bring my own sense of green and gold. I don't know if you know this, but the Australian, like when Australia competes in the Olympics or any kind of international sport, our colours are the green and gold. So really, like all of Australia is kind of just like a subsidiary Packers fan base.
Yeah, like a sneaky Packer fan base. I like it. That's good to know.
Take them all. Joe, how are you? How are we feeling about the draft?
You know, I love it. The draft for me is like Christmas. And I think a lot of people can tell from if, we had our live stream for day 2, which I think other than a few bumps early on really went off well. Thank you to everybody who watched. I noticed on Twitter, it said we were up to 134 viewers at some point. So, I mean, whoever you are, great, stick around. We got a lot of stuff coming up that's going to be great. But one of the big things on there people probably were seeing was I was yelling at our guests to not tip picks because they were tipping picks every other minute. And, I just, my feeling is it's like Christmas morning when you're a kid and you see the package all wrapped up and bow on top and everything. And the person hands it to you and go, oh, I got you a brand new football. Well, you just took out the mystique of watching this because now what's the point of unwrapping the gift? You just told me what it was. So, but no, I love the draft every year. Now that we're doing the podcast during draft year, I really have dug into it again, and I kind of missed it. I had not really dug into prospects the last few years like I used to, and now this year I dug into it, and I had to pat myself on the back. I did pretty well with some of the guys that I was watching. So, for being out of watching film on guys for 4 or 5 years, I managed to stick with guys like Brian Maffey and Mike Kawano and stuff like that. So, but I was really happy with the draft. I mean, I know we're going to get into the individual picks here in a few minutes, but obviously I got to say IOWA.
Iowa State.
Oh, shut up. We don't talk about that group.
Yeah. I mean, the thing about the draft, right, is the draft is kind of, for me, is like almost the most exciting day of the year as a football fan because it happens every year. The Super Bowl, not so much. We just talked about pre-show here. I've never personally experienced the Packers Super Bowl run. I was there for the Bucks run a couple of years ago, but the championship is not something you take for granted. Whereas the draft is like, every year there's always new kids coming out. It's always they're kind of there's always hope that things are going to be better. It's the most positive time of the year is the off season, right? So it's always just like so much fun. And I've never gone this deep into a draft before. I mean, I've always like listened to other podcasts and kind of followed it. But when we went through this whole draft, there was only 2 players that I didn't actually know who they were. And I was like, it felt really cool to be in the 7th round. And like, I've watched these guys play and I know how good they are or how bad they are. And it's just like quite fun. I mean, how deep do you get into the draft, Fred?
I got into it when I was a little kid. So I remember being, it felt like every year around draft time, I would be down in Florida with my grandpa, my uncles, my dad. We'd always end up at, some sports bar watching the draft for the first couple of days, at least the first day. Back then I feel like it wasn't a 3-day spectacle. I feel like
it was like 2 days. It was Saturday
it was
and Sunday.
2 days. Yeah, it was a different ball game. But I was a young kid, so we'd go with my uncles and my dad and like my grandpa, like I said, and we'd sit there and, I'd get chicken tenders and, sodas on repeat for 7 straight hours. And I'd sit there and watch it. And, like I said, I was a kid. So like, I didn't really know a lot. I knew the teams. I knew some of the players, I knew some of the funny names. I enjoyed some of the funny names. The Rashawn Salams, the Kajana Carters, things like that. That seems so funny to me at that age. But I just always remember looking at my uncles, my dad, and grandpa, and they were so into it, right? They were so dedicated and emotional really over who would be taken, not crying, but like, swearing, yelling, pissed off, or they were like super happy. And I'd always be like kind of looking at them like, these guys are crazy, man. Like, what are they so excited about? And it kind of just, became a thing that I started to just inherit year after year. I started to focus on it, pay more attention to it. It's like if you have an older brother, right? You kind of look up to him, you start to emulate a little bit about what he's doing. So I started to just be like, well, I want to be in the conversations, right? I want to be the guy that they're high-fiving. I want to know what I'm talking about. So I just started at a young age, kind of really studying and kind of focusing on it. I'd get the draft magazine, the Lindy's draft magazine every
Yep.
year since I was a kid. I still to this day get it. It's like I have to get it, right? I don't use it. It's not my Bible by any means, but I feel like I have to get it, right? It's like sacrilegious
Creature
if I
of
don't get it.
what's that?
Yeah,
Creature of habit.
creature of habit, of course. But you know what? It's like my absolute favorite time of the year, right? It's the couple days a year that my wife knows are marked. It's marked off on the calendar. Don't ask me to do anything. Let me, I'm gonna just post up in the basement. I'm gonna, probably drink too many beers, eat too many slices of pizza, and I'm just gonna focus in on it. And football for me is obviously a big deal, and I watch it. I watch a lot of high school football. I watch a lot of college football. And so when you get to that draft point, right, a lot of guys I've been watching since high school days, right? So it's this like, it's like being a coach. I've coached for a few years, and you just have this like pride almost. I didn't coach any of these kids, but watching them come up through the ranks and seeing them kind of, go through college and do what they're doing, and then see them kind of get drafted, you kind of like, all right, cool, man. This is really exciting to see this guy kind of go somewhere. And you start to develop like these guys that you kind of have a little bit more of a, connection with, or you feel like you want them to succeed. You're excited for them. So it's deep, man. It's really, really deep with me in the draft. I love it. Unlike, you, Joe, it was super different for me this year. This was the first year that I was probably as disconnected from the draft as I've ever been. It just kind of, I've been busy with a ton of other things. So it kind of just fell to the wayside a little bit. Even to the point where I was actually doing something on that Saturday and Sunday, or on that Friday and Saturday. So, not that I wasn't
Blasphemy.
paying attention. I was totally paying attention. I actually had a whole crew of people at the same place I was, that we were like sliding each other, messages the entire time. But it was a different kind of weird approach, that I can 100% say I did not enjoy. I enjoyed where I was, but I did not enjoy not being tuned in as much as I usually have been, because there was moments where I was like, I don't feel like I know as much about this player or that player that I maybe should have known or want to know. Usually I spend a lot more time diving into film and watching, a lot of game tape on a lot of different guys. Because I think a lot of people, watch highlights, right? And they're like, oh, he's super good because I watched his 5 YouTube highlights. It's like, well, okay, I could show you my highlight reel and it's going to look really good. But tell you what, the other 24 hours a day or 23 hours a day, I'm terrible. So I always feel like that kind of gets a little misconstrued. But no, it was cool to still see. I feel like everybody that we drafted, I still had a pretty decent knowledge base on. Couple that I felt a little bit off from. But as soon as they were taken, I was like diving into film hardcore, and now I feel like I'm kind of right back at where that spot. So that's my extremely long answer, as to why I love the draft. But as you can tell, I mean, it's just been something that's been in my life for a long time, and hopefully we'll pass on to like my kids at some point. They'll start to kind of get hyped up about it as much as I do. But yeah, I love it, man. It's my favorite
Yeah,
time of the year.
that's awesome.
Now, I've got a question for you, and of course, I really want to get you on at another point after this because, obviously your grandpa was Packers great, Fuzzy Thurston, and I would love to hear some. I always love hearing stories from then, and I imagine he passed on a lot of good things with you. What was it like going through those drafts with a guy that pretty much went through a similar, well, maybe not similar process, but went through that kind of draft process where the team wanted his services, so they went after him. So I would have loved to known his perspective watching the draft with him of how it changed. I got to talk to a guy who was drafted by Lombardi a few years back, and I can't remember what his name is off the top of my head. And he said that he didn't even know he got drafted. He just got a phone call from one of the secretaries saying, "Hey, you need to show up, because the Packers just picked up your rights." And so he made the drive to Green Bay. And so I guess this is my long question: is what was it like with having a guy who played so long in the league, watching the draft with him?
Yeah, no, it's definitely, I mean, it's definitely a different world, right? Like it's clearly a spectacle nowadays,
Yeah,
right? We have obviously everything, we see it, the suits and the chains and the drip or whatever you want to call it, and there's TVs everywhere, and people, it's chaos. It's not like it was back then. So interesting thing with him is that he wasn't drafted by the Packers. So he was drafted by
right.
the
Yeah,
Eagles, and then went off to, played very short amount of time with the Bears, was in I think Winnipeg for the CFL, and then came back, and then was eventually ended up at the Packers. So, for them, like you said, it was a rights thing, right? It wasn't like a, hey, we're drafting you, this is a big thing. So for him, it didn't mean as much, right? It wasn't
right,
as there wasn't anything tied to it. It was more of like, okay, these guys are, it's just different for him. He comes from an old school kind of situation. Um, and so I think it was, he was more just kind of in tune with the moment than it was really being deep into the actual players. Whereas my uncles were much more into it, right? Um, my two uncles and my dad knew everything, right? They watched football religiously. They knew every single player, every single, that was when you watched all the football games. You couldn't go watch, film. You couldn't get all that stuff back in the day. So,
right.
they were diehard football fans, and they knew a lot more. Whereas my grandpa, you know, he was just kind of, in for the ride. It was, it wasn't a really, I wish I could tell you, he was like super intense and awesome with it. It wasn't really about that. I think he probably just more or less enjoyed all of us being together. But yeah, I mean, his story to get to the Packers was so unique in its own right that, I don't think, he never really had crazy allegiance, to anyone but the Packers, even though they
Right.
did not draft him technically. But Lombardi did trade for him. So there is, that's where I think his undying allegiance came from, as opposed to, like for Philadelphia.
Right. And like I said, I would love to get you back on just to go through some of that stuff, because I love listening to, I could sit there and listen to Jerry Kramer for days just with
Oh
some of the
yeah.
stuff that he talks about. And I even bought his book, Instant Replay. Or no, I got it for Christmas a few years back, and I just sat down. I think I read it in a day because it was just so great to read that stuff. And I love listening to the old interviews. So unfortunately, I can't talk to your grandpa about it right now, but I can talk to his grandson and get what he passed on to his grandson.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, man, such a different world back then, right? Like I think about all the time. I'm like, man, if I could have just time travel, right? If someone came
Yeah.
up to me and was like, hey, you can time travel to whenever you want for 24 hours, I would be like, you know, game day 1964, 63, whatever. I don't know what year I would pick, but, game day, and let me go watch him play and then do the post game with them, because the post game was like, we're going to go get some steaks and drink ourselves to sleep, basically. Again, different world. But those guys were just crazy, man. I mean, there's a lot of really great stories that I was told, a lot that I probably can't retell, but
Well,
um,
most of them are dead anymore, so
well,
I
right, I
think the
probably couldn't get
statue's
into
out there.
yeah, I probably couldn't get in too much trouble anymore. But yeah, I mean, like they were kings. They were
Yep.
legitimate kings of this area, and it's
Well, what
something
was
that.
the shirt Paul Horting had out for a while? I slept with your grandma, or I am
Oh
your
yeah,
grandpa, or
and it was
whatever it
true.
was.
I mean, he did, like he was the king, and I mean, there's stories like Paul Horning has a book, and talks. I think there's like a 3-page part where it just talks about drinking with my grandpa. My grandpa was a very good drinker, if you will. I don't know if that's an honorary thing or not,
Yeah, but
but
how many of
I
them
thought.
weren't?
I believe me, I thought it was for a very long time, but no, I mean they would go out and they would just, I mean, get absolutely annihilated. But they were prime athletes at that point, I guess, so they could do it, and they would go to bars and there's
Well, what you
girls
would call
everywhere. And
prime athletes at that point, you know,
absolutely, that's why I
they're
say
not
that's
the
why I
one.
say yeah, that's why I say it with kind of a question mark, because it's like I technically am at the same exact height and weight that my grandpa was when he played. And he was, he was like 6'2", 240. I'm 6'2", 240. And he played offensive line. I would die. I would literally die right now if I tried to go line up against, an Aaron Donald. And they had some big guys back then. Obviously, everything was a little bit differently
Yeah,
sized, but there was still some big dudes. Buck Buchanan. I mean, there was Deacon was a monster.
yeah, Bubba
Um,
Smith.
yeah, but I mean, you could be an offensive lineman at 6'2", 240 and be something different. But he was a different strength, man. Like, we just were talking about this tonight at our dinner. My oldest son plays football. He's a wide receiver,
Yeah.
and he was talking about, he's like, I just want my arms to get bigger. And I'm like, I think you got like your arms are good size for a 16-year-old boy, especially a receiver. And he's like, no, it's not it's not the bicep area. He's like, it's the forearms. And I'm like, well, I'll come up with some ideas for you or whatever to try to fix that out. But,
Well, you know
but I,
that's what you do late at night when everybody's in bed is work those
yeah,
forearms.
yeah, no, I'm not telling him to do that. But the
I'm
funny thing
sorry.
is,
That was wrong. I
yeah,
apologize.
uh, so I was telling him this story that, so my grandpa grew up in Altoona, Wisconsin. I
Yep.
know we want to talk about the draft, so I won't go on too far with this, but,
No, like I said, I will get you on a whole nother podcast, and we'll just do. I don't care if we got to sit here for 5 hours. I just want to hear it.
Um, so when he was younger, they had the big ice blocks, right? That you would take to the
Yep.
refrigerators. That's how
Yep.
you would freeze your food. This was back in the 40s. And then they had those big ice picks that you would kind of hold with it, but you would basically be doing massive, like, you'd be holding with your forearms.
Oh yeah, I know what
And
they
he would
are.
do that throughout all the summers, right? When he was in grade school, middle school, going into high school. So he had really built up that strength in his arms and his forearms. Well, in Madison, in the late 60s, early 70s, there was a science guy, some scientist or some, whatever, had developed this machine to test the strength of a forearm, right? So it was
Okay,
kind of
yeah.
a push machine or whatever you want to kind of say, like a squeeze machine. And he brought it there, and he had some of the wrestling team guys work on it, a couple bodybuilders work on it, a couple just huge dudes, and then he had my grandpa come, and because my grandpa was in Madison at that time, and had him do it, and he broke it. He literally broke the machine. That's how strong his forearms were. Um, and I always, like, that story always sticks to me, because I just think about, as a kid, right? As a kid, like 5, 6 years old, I would go and hang out at his house, and we'd be like, playing football, right? I'd be on his bed and I'd be trying to get past him or whatever. And I'm just this little kid. And he, as much of a teddy bear as he was, sometimes didn't realize how strong he was. And instead of, just giving me a little like push off or whatever, he would like throw me clear into the like wall, and I'd be like, boom. And I'd be like, what in the world? But that's just like, I never forget, like, he just had a different strength, right? And anybody who ever met him, ever knew him, will always reference his hugs, because he would hug you and it would feel like you were going to just be crushed by the weight of his hug. So, yeah, I mean, we can definitely talk more about it. Sorry for going on a rant there. It just
No, that's great.
thought
I
that
love
was
listening,
ironic we were
and just
talking
seeing
about
your
it.
face light up is
Love
that
it.
makes
Yeah.
it worth it too. So no big deal. Yeah, we'll talk about draft, but we'll definitely have you back on. And I know Nick really appreciate hearing some of those old school stories
Yeah,
too.
no, that's so amazing to hear that.
But yeah, well, why don't we go ahead and jump in on these picks? And uh,
Mhm.
everybody's roasting me in the DMs on Twitter right now. So
Yeah. So back to the draft. I mean, thanks so much for sharing that, Fred. That was really cool.
Oh yeah.
Back to the draft. 13 picks. I mean, like, too many picks, really. I mean, I'll list them all off here, but pretty interesting kind of cast of characters, and not really what I expected the Packers to do. At
let's
13,
just
Lucas.
we'll take them one at a time. That way we can, you know. me and Fred are getting old. Our memories aren't there anymore. So if you list them all now, we'll never remember 'em.
So in the first round, we picked Lucas Van Ness out of Iowa. This is Joe's guy. I mean
Yes.
Van Ness. I mean, it's like from day one, he was born to be a Packer. I mean, this everything about the way he profiles as an edge rusher. The only thing was like his broad jump wasn't quite like elite 80th percentile. But I mean, besides that, like the perfect Packer edge rusher, and is kind of almost like I kind of almost prefer him a little bit to when Rashawn Gary came out. Um, but yeah, I think it kind of the boring pick with JSN still on the board, but I think a lot of people were pretty happy. They kind of expected this pick. How do you guys feel about Van Ness?
Well, everybody knows how I feel about it, so I'm not going to take up too much time saying it. The one thing that I will say is if you remember when we started doing our draft preview, I was very early on. Kept saying that I'm really surprised that they're talking Lucas Van Ness in the first round because, yeah, he went to Iowa, so obviously I'm going to have a bias with him anyway. So hey, whatever. But I didn't really think that he made that jump off the game film to say, yeah, that guy is a top 10 pick. He's going to be this amazing guy. I said, maybe he'll blow up at the combine, but it seemed like every mock draft that we were reading, they had him going at 15 to Green Bay, or they had him going at 10, or I seen him mock draft where they had him going at like 5, and it's just like, okay, at that time it just boggled my mind. But as I got into it, and we got hanging around some of the other draft people, and they started talking, and then after seeing the almost elite uh, uh, combine results he had. I mean, they were talking that he has an even better RAS score than Nick Bosa did coming out. Well, who wouldn't want a better Nick Bosa? So, I'm really happy with the pick one way or the other. I mean, I suppose even if he went to Wisconsin and he had the same, stats and the same RAS score, I would be okay with it. I always say that, um, once as much as I love the colleges, looking at the colleges they come from, once they wear that green and gold, like my shirt says, it's a Packer family. And once they're drafted into it, and once they become, once they wear that green and gold, it's green and gold forever. And, we may have animosity with them at some point, cough, cough, Aaron Rodgers, cough, cough, Greg Jennings, whatever. But, they still wore it. They're still part of the family. And so one way or the other, I was going to be. I guess you'd have to be okay with it because the Packers took him. They must see something in him to like. So, but I, for one, am really happy. I know anybody who watched the live stream saw I had my Hawkeye shirt on the next day, so I was really proud of that one. But yeah, it's a solid pick. I really think having him in a rotation is going to be great, especially when Gary gets back on the field and they start slowly involving Rashawn in there. And as much as people didn't would have rather had the JSNs or Kincaid or whoever else, it made more sense to take an edge than it did a lot of the other positions because edge is a sneaky need, as some people would say. Rashawn's going to be out part of the year. Preston Smith isn't getting any younger. Kingsley was okay, was decent, was good, but who knows if he's going to be able to repeat what he showed last year as a rookie. And then after that, there's like nobody. So, they really needed to take edge, and why not take one from Iowa? It's about time we took an Iowa guy in the first round since 2010.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it was his prototypical Wisconsin or Packer pick, right? I mean, you said it was a quote unquote, it was a solid pick, right? Like that's to me, that's like the most Packer thing ever, right? Like it wasn't something that we're like, yeah, this is great, this is gonna change, like. But that's the smart move, right? That's the Packer organization. It's what Gutekunst does. I think it showed a lot to their the youth of the team, right? We're not in a we got to win tomorrow necessarily, and that's not saying that he can't come out and obviously be a playmaker day one. But it does very much feel like, Rashawn Gary-esque type situation, right? When Rashawn Gary came in, freak athlete, incredible upside, incredible abilities, very, kind of unpolished technique, but a ton of talent
Mm-hmm.
to actually get to that point. So I think with Van Ness, I think it's a little bit, I want to say maybe he's a little bit more polished, but very, very minimally more polished. I think there's he relies a lot on just his speed and his bull rush more than he does on different opportunities to,
Yeah, he's definitely
you
got to
know,
develop another move because it's
yeah.
usually yeah, yeah.
And that's fair, and that's exactly what basically Gary was at when he was coming out of Michigan. I mean, he didn't have a really big tree worth of, technique and moves. So, I mean, to me, it's the most obvious, like, just Packer pick, right? It wasn't something that blew our minds. High RAS score, good culture guy. Um, as far as it being an edge, yeah, like that's a 100% need that we had to address immediately. And I think a lot of people got very, very mixed up with the receiver thing, and got a little too hyped on that thought process. And it was like, well, hey, I don't know if you know this or not, but we play in a league where it's very pass heavy. And having an edge guy is like, at least one edge guy is going to be kind of important. And at that point, we don't really have any edge guys. We have a Preston, but I think Preston's kind of developing into a literal edge guy, right? He's trying to get out there, set the edge, kind of be there. He's not someone who's necessarily rushing the quarterback. He obviously has that ability. And we saw that, I think, the last 2 years. I think he kind of maneuvered into that a little bit. But I don't think that's his primary role, where I think that is a Gary pin your ears back and go get him kind of guy. I think they can do that with Van Ness, but they're going to also have to really, put the time and effort into kind of develop him as a little bit more of a, uh, unique pass rusher as opposed to just a bull rusher. But that being said, it's a very sexy tandem going into the next 5 to 10 years, right? If we can lock up Gary for 5 more, and we have Van Ness for 5 more, and he does pan out to be a Rashawn Gary type player, if you will, or better, that's a really, really good edge game that we have. And I think that helps obviously the entire rest of that defense. I feel like we've had too many years where we were reliant on Kenny Clark to really do anything on that defensive line, and then hopeful that our corners and safeties were able to do stuff. But that's just not fair in today's game where it's so heavy pass.
And the guy's nickname's Hercules. I mean, how
Yeah.
can you go wrong with that?
Yeah. Hey, let me ask you this. So a lot of people's questions or concerns, I guess, more than anything would be, the non-starts, the limited snaps. So what is that? I know there's some things with Iowa that are they're like have some, I don't know if it's like seniority type rules
It
or things like that.
is.
Is that true?
Yeah, Kirk has this weird archaic rule that if you're a senior, if you're an upperclassman, you're going to get most of the starts. But that didn't stop him from, I think he played over 1,000 snaps
Right.
anyway. So but yeah, Kirk has one of them archaic rules. The only time he's been breaking it lately is with his quarterbacks, but with as crappy as he's been recruiting quarterbacks lately, it's not surprising to see him start freshmen. But now that Cade McNamara transferred over, maybe that'll fix things a little bit. But yeah, it's the archaic way. I
Yeah,
remember it even goes back to when it was Jake Rudock and CJ Beathard on the team. He kept throwing Rudock out there, even though Beathard was the better option. But Beathard was a year behind Rudock, and so yeah, it was Kirk.
well, yeah. Even with the seniority thing, Lucas Van Ness was, I can't remember if it was, is either first or second on the team in defensive snaps still.
Yeah, yeah,
So
Yeah.
he still played heaps.
yeah,
Um,
and that's the whole Parker system. I mean, the Parker brothers, I know that's weird, but they've been solid defensive coordinators for years at Iowa. And I mean, I'm going to assume you're a Wisconsin guy, Fred. So
Yep.
for years that Iowa's always had a dominant defense, whether their
Yep.
offensive has done anything or not, and that's been because of both the Parkers, and now it's Phil, and I mean, these guys, they're taking 1 and 2 star recruits and turning them into top talent. So there's something there with them, but yeah, it's more the whole seniority thing than anything, and it is part of it is that he needed to work on some of his pass rush stuff. It was a lot of the bull rush. Okay, well, you need to kind of fill out a little bit more here, or they also threw him more as a defensive lineman than they did a stand up edge, but hey, look at some of the games he played.
Yeah.
There's the video going around of him just taking Peter Skoronski's soul, and he dominated both the Ohio State tackles, and that's pretty damn good. So, but I don't want to toot the Iowa horn anymore. So
Yeah, I think the last thing I'll say about Van Ness is just kind of like the raw play strength is really what stuck out for me from like especially in the class of edge rushers with a lot of lighter guys. I think for me it was kind of like him and Tyree Wilson were kind of the two like most like powerful outside rushers. And it's just like especially as the league is kind of transitioning to more lighter players on the O line and especially at tackle. Um, like you said, even like Paris Johnson Jr., you saw him kind of like tear him apart in college as well. It's just like it's just really interesting because it's always like a cyclical thing, right? And like as they say, there's only a limited number of those people who are built like that in the first place. So if you can get your hands on just a couple of them, I think you're in a good spot.
well, there was one knock that I kept hearing about him was he only put 13 reps up at the combine on the bench press. But what
Long
people
arms,
also,
long arms.
that's what I was just going to say, people fail to remember he also has long ass arms that they say the longer your arms, the harder it is to put up reps on the bench press.
Yeah.
So if they're thinking that's a knock, it's not a knock. Matter of fact, you want your edge rusher to have long arms because that means he can put one into the tackle's chest and drive him back to the quarterback. He's not going to get caught by a tackle or a guard. So it, there's not much to knock on him. Taking the Iowa bias out of it, I'm having a hard time doing that because I
Yeah,
love it, it, but it's really hard to put any knocks on him just because he seems to be an all around talent. He's got the athletic ability, he's got the production, so I can't wait to see him. Uh, when we get into real football, see what he can do.
yeah. Now, let's get into day two. So day two was Luke Musgrave from Oregon State, Jaden Reed from Michigan State, and Tucker Kraft, my guy, from South Dakota State. How did we feel about day two? For me, this was kind of like my favorite day of the draft. This was like getting both Musgrave and Kraft. I mean, yeah, like Joe knows Kraft was like my guy. He was basically in every single mock draft that I did. And Musgrave is kind of like such a Packers tight end. Is also the only one that they didn't have the only one of the top 5 or 6 guys they didn't have a visit with, which is kind of like their way of saying that they're already sold on him. And of course Jaden Reed, which we'll talk about here in a second. But like, what were your guys' thoughts on day two?
Obviously we said a lot of our comments on our live stream, so I'm not going to repeat too much on it, but you know, I like it. Kraft is a great pickup. Hopefully he can, knock on wood, he can break that 3rd round curse finally. Musgrave, great pickup. Hopefully he can stay healthy. I know he was getting some nicks and bangs in the college this last year. So hopefully he can stay healthy and be productive. The only one that I can say is I didn't really watch anything on Jaden Reed because when I went to go look at him, I saw the 5'10", the 190, 200 pound, and I was like, I don't know if the Packers are going to take him just because of the height. So, I'm not going to bother watching anything on him. And so I really didn't watch anything on Jaden Reed, so I couldn't really talk. But the way Brian Maffey and Quano were kind of talking about him on the live stream, kind of set my mind at ease. I know Mafi kept saying that he has shorter arms, so that's going to be an interesting thing to see if he can produce in the league with such short arms. But just watching some of the highlights afterwards, it seemed like he could be what they've been trying to get the last few years. Bringing Cobb back, drafting Amari Rogers, that type of wide receiver. It looks like he can be what they're looking for. So love it. And it was exciting because that's when we saw most of the maneuvering the Packers did, the trade downs and the move arounds and stuff. So that always makes draft night fun. But, I hate to repeat what everybody seems to be saying, but, when you've got a young quarterback, you want to surround him with as much talent as you can. And that's what Goody and crew were doing. So I'm happy with it.
Yeah, I thought day 2 was a huge success. I think it's going to prove to be even a bigger success once we see them all in the field. But Musgrave was one of my big guys. I really really liked him. I thought he was, he would have, without a doubt, in my mind, been the number 1 tight end coming out had he not had injuries last year. I mean, the guy has just incredible skill set, speed, the ability to stretch the defense. Very much has, and I compare a lot on our show. Our offense, I think, has always been on a trajectory to be similar to the 49ers offense, right? It kind of comes from the same tree, whatever.
Yep.
Obviously, that's never been able to happen because of Aaron Rodgers. But when you see the people, the pieces that have been brought in over the last couple of years, right? They're very similar. There's a lot of different, comparisons. Josiah DeGuara with like a Frankie Juszczyk. I see a lot of, a Musgrave being similar to like that Kittle, right? That guy that can stretch a seam, can run after the catch. Now I'm not saying he's Kittle, right?
Right.
And whenever
Yeah.
you compare people, everyone freaks out. But I think he has that similar play style. It's a little rough because I don't think he has much of any blocking ability. I think that can obviously be a little bit taught and a little bit brought on. So I'm not too concerned about that. That's very teachable. And as he gets into it and starts, kind of putting on a little bit extra weight, I think he'll be okay. The Tucker Craft thing, like he was, I'm always one of those guys who gets hyped about the Dakota State kind of guys, right? Like there's just something, I don't know, something I like about them, which is ironic because when they drafted Christian Watson, I was not excited at all. I felt completely opposite for some reason, right? But every year
Don't say that, Fred. We got Christian super fan right there.
No, and listen, I was completely wrong about it, and I'll be the first person in the world to admit that I'm an absolutely terrible judge when it comes to receivers. Every guy that I've ever loved has always never panned out. Every guy that I thought was not great has done pretty well. So with Christian Watson, that was my thing was, I felt like there was other guys on the board and we take a North Dakota State guy. Oh my gosh, blah, blah, blah. That was wrong. So now we get this guy from South Dakota State who just feels like Wisconsin, right? He just looks Wisconsin. He talks Wisconsin. He acts Wisconsin. I feel
He's
like
got a
he can very
Wisconsin
much,
name.
yeah,
Craft.
like I just feel like he can come in and he can just be, that prototypical, I would say like mid 90s type tight end, right? That's what I see. I don't see necessarily a ton of like that new electric type tight end. He's just like that really good red zone blocking, possession, across the middle kind of guy tight end. But what I like the most about them both, right, is they can feed off each other, right?
Yeah.
Neither one of them is going to want to be the guy that didn't do better than the other, right? So they're gonna challenge each other. They're gonna battle each other on the field. And they're gonna get a lot of opportunities to do so. But again, it kind of just keeps coming back to where I will always come back to is like that similar run base but pass offense, RPO, San Francisco type offense, right? Where you have a
Yep.
couple tight end sets, you have very interesting running backs like with Aaron Jones, AJ Dillon, Josiah DeGuara as an H-back. There's just a very cool, interesting thought process of what this offense can look like. And then that's where you throw in, Reed, who, being obviously Wisconsin guy, I've seen him a little bit, but I feel like I didn't pay enough attention to him, right? I
Right.
guess I just never really noticed him. But man, oh man, if I haven't heard any more praise about this guy since the draft, I mean, everybody seems to be on this thought process that he can be an electric playmaker in the NFL. Whether it's going up for a contested catch, punt returning, his speed, his ability. People talk a lot about, the fact that he had, a certified turd throwing him the ball at Michigan State. That, if he would have been anywhere else, we would be talking completely different. We're talking about a first round guy. I've seen a couple different scouts and a couple different people from within that organization even say, he would have been potentially the number one, maybe number two receiver had it not been for the fact that he had, was it Thorne or whatever his name is
Oh,
from
I don't
Michigan
even
State,
remember.
throwing him the ball. I think that's his name. But yeah, so I mean, there's like this newfound like, holy crap, did we maybe sneak a really good receiver that everybody kind of backed away from because it was Michigan State and it wasn't a good quarterback and he transferred. And so it's me being extremely optimistic, which I usually am as a Packer fan, but I think that's always been kind of the position we've been missing, right? I mean, is this little speed demon guy that can kind of stretch the field. And now when you think of, Watson, you think of Dubs and his ability to kind of be a route runner, great pass catcher. You have a Reed flying around. You have a DeGuara maybe coming out of the backfield. You have a 2 tight end set. You got Kraft coming this way. You got Musgrave going up the seam. I mean, you're stretching offenses. And what I like the most about that thought process, besides just that thought process, is when you have that defense getting so stretched, we have a quarterback who can run the ball now.
Yes, sir.
And that changes to me so much because I think teams have gotten so used to just kind of sitting back in that, 2 safety set because they know Aaron Rodgers is going to throw the ball. And a lot of times they're going to get burned by that. But I think now it just adds a whole new wrinkle into this offense that I think is super dangerous for other teams, and they're not ready for it.
Like I said, I think the only knock that a lot of people are having against Reed was the short arms. That's what Brian Maffey kept bringing up, and um, I
Maybe
hope
Van Ness can give him some of his arms.
Yeah, no kidding, right? Um, but there's talk out there that had Reed had a little bit longer arms, you could he could have went first round because of that. But also I've heard a lot of comparisons that he's a little less polished JSN. So everybody who wanted Jackson Smith and Jigba, this is your Jackson Smith and Jigba. It's just, he's not as polished. So, I'm happy for it. I can't wait to see what happens. Like I said, this is all speculation from us on how we feel until they actually put the pads on and start doing
For
work.
Sure.
And I mean, people can hate all they want on certain picks, but it's always funny. And now that with social media, you can't do it as much because people will pull out the receipts. But it's always funny listening to the ones that rip apart these draft picks. And then when they start doing well in the season, oh well, I've been on this guy all year long, and I love this guy, and he's such a great talent, and I'm so happy they drafted him, and it'll be.
I saved a lot of receipts from the Rashawn Gary pick because there was a lot of people that,
Joe was one of them.
I don't know if I'd say trust
Yeah,
necessarily, but I listened to and I liked, and they were just ripping on it. And I was like, I don't know, man. I mean, and I was not by any means like super hyped about the pick, but I was just like, I don't know, like just the way they were saying things, they acted like it was, the apocalypse because we took this guy. And I'm like, I don't think it's going to be that big a deal. And then the way that he like sobbed after getting picked, I was like, there's no way this guy's not going to come out and just be an animal. Like, you're just not that emotional with it. But I think another thing too, with just the draft in general, like we get really caught up, right, in what school they go to, what their stats look like, how their combine looks, all these kind of artificial things, I guess, in a weird way. They're real, but to me, they feel artificial because when it really comes down to it, like there's so many factors in their success plan, right?
Right.
Quarterbacks are a perfect example. We see this every single year of our life. If the quarterback's not going to a team that has a stable organization, stable coaching staff, good coaching room, players that mend with them, a coach that mends with them, there's so many things. You can't just plop a quarterback into a system and just say, all right, fix it, man. I mean, The Browns for 40, 50 years kept drafting guys they just expected to be their savior. The Jets, right? Until they had to pick up our guy. That's just what they do. They think, let me just throw this guy in here and he's just going to magically save this team. There's a lot to it, right? Those guys come in with extreme egos. They come in with extreme sensitivity. And if you all of a sudden have, 4 offensive coordinators in 4 years, you got 3 coaches, you haven't had any stability, you got receivers coming in and going. I mean, they're speaking of creatures of habit, like we talked about, they are the absolute epitome of creatures of habit. And when you start messing that up, it's hard for guys to kind of get going. Like you see the transfer portal now in college, which I think is, a whole nother ball game. But they can pull that off there. It's going to give them a very mixed thought process on what the NFL is going to be like, because it just doesn't work that way. So when you talk about guys like a Jaron Reed, like, okay, Michigan State, not that cool. Short arms, maybe not that cool. Combine wasn't great. This or that, tape wasn't good here. But if he comes in and he's got the right room and he develops a relationship with Rodgers and the receiver coach is legit, there's a very good chance he could just work. And it's not going to work just because he ran a really good 40. It's going to work
Right.
because the whole system, it meshed, right? It's like this perfect storm. Happens a lot, happens even more not, it's just, it is what it is.
Well, and let's face it, these guys in the front offices have way more stuff that they can
Yes.
watch than we can.
Yes.
So I
They
mean,
do this literally every day of their life.
and they get paid millions of dollars to do it. Whereas, I don't get paid a single dime to do it, and I have to do it in my free time when I'm not working or,
Right.
anything else. And that's why I don't take it as serious as a lot of some of these other people, but I will still sit down and I'll watch stuff and I'll say, okay, I can see what this guy's talking about, or I can see what this guy's talking about, but I don't think it's going to hurt. And let's face it, I'm going to have a different opinion than what this guy over here is going to have a different opinion, because we saw it differently. Whereas, I could see, okay, well, this guy had good route tree, but he just needs to be more polished. This guy over here is going to say, oh, he sucks at running routes. So everybody's going to have their own opinions on everything. So until that moment when they get on the pads and get out there for meaningful football, nobody knows what's going to happen. We can guess. Even the front offices are guessing, but they have a better shot at getting their guess right than we do, because they have the experience, they have the better things to watch off of them. They've got the college coaches sitting here telling them, oh yeah, this guy worked his ass off in the weight room. This guy put 100% effort every day at the field. So that's what we're hearing about some of these draft picks now. Like your Darnell Washington. I know everybody in the world, even Nick, was going nuts over Darnell Washington, wanting the Packers pick him. Well, it comes to find out, not only did he have a knee issue, but he's a dick. According to, Mafia and a couple other people that I heard from, he completely bombed his interviews with teams. So here he's taking this slide down uh, the draft board, and everybody's, well, what's going on? Why aren't they taking him? They know. They know what's happening because they do this stuff. They talk to these guys. We don't. It's not like I can pick up my phone and get, let's say Lucas Van Ness on the phone and say, hey, Luke, what's happening? How'd your interview go with the Saints? Or how'd your interview go with the Packers? As much as I'd love to pick up that phone and say, call Lucas Van Ness and say, hey, what's happening, buddy? It's not happening, but
Yeah.
what do we got next? We got the 4th round, right? We're in the 4th round.
Yeah, I think it's because there's so many picks here. I'm just going to split it into the 4th and 5th, and then we'll do the 6th and 7th together. So in the 4th, we had Colby Wooden from Auburn, kind of like we'll talk about this. It's like a bit of an in-betweener, kind of on the inside of the defensive line there. And then on round 5, Sean Clifford out of Penn State and Dontavian Wicks from Virginia. This is kind of, so at the time I was like really excited, kind of, and then going a little bit deeper into the kind of the Colby Wooden and like Sean Clifford, he was one of the picks that I actually predicted for the Packers in the 7th, not in the 5th. And yeah, like it's like I trust the coaching staff of the Packers, but it does feel a little bit like they kind of I don't say panicked, but they thought that maybe he wouldn't last another round. The five quarterbacks went in between Colby Wooden and Sean Clifford. I think they kind of were reacting to that, and yeah, they just wanted like that guy, and he was one of the ones that I thought would be like a good later pickup for the Packers, but it's kind of like it's whatever. It's like the fifth round. It doesn't really matter that much. I'm not gonna like be like, oh, I give this draft an F grade because because they drafted the quarterback a couple rounds early. Um, and like Dontavian Wicks is another one of these guys that I thought was just like destined to be a Packer from the very start. Like he's just such that like the body type, the way he plays, even some of the drop issues. The Packers love that. um, I just thought he's like, a lot of the guys like I know Dusty was on it, Mike and Brian, like we always say that these guys all have a pretty close pulse on what the Packers like, and yeah, I think he has the opportunity to kind of just fit in like a Geronimo kind of role, just like a fourth or fifth guy who's just like does some nice things for you, and also like doesn't run in slow motion like Geronimo did. How do you guys feel about
It's true.
these rounds?
Again, this is where I'm going to say that there's some of them that I didn't get a chance to watch just because of how short a time we were in between recording some of our episodes for the draft preview. I didn't get to Colby, um, uh, but he is going to be an in-betweener. I know Kawano and some other guys are saying that they view him as like a Kingsley Kiki. Uh, so he's going to be a pass rush specialist. The weight's a little undersized. He could probably be an edge or a lineman, but he's gonna be a lineman for the Packers. Uh, Wicks. The only thing that I saw was that his 40 time at the combine was crap, but I guess he suffered some kind of hip flexor, and so he pulled out of the combine not long after running his 40. But then one of the teams timed him at the pro day and he ran like a 4.34. So, you know,
4.52.
yeah. And, well, no, from what I was hearing, one of the teams themselves had him at like 4.42 or 4.34 or something,
Really?
hand time. So I can't remember where I heard it. Maybe it was the the Gold Zone podcast with Westendorf and Morley. Uh, um, I could have heard it on there, but so if he can show he has speed, then great. I view it as kind of an Alan Lazard replacement type pick for him. If he hits, great. Fifth round pick, I'm not going to complain about too much because it could always be worse. Uh, Sean Clifford, I have no problems with him being taken in the fifth round. I know a lot of guys feel like you, Nick, where he probably could have been a seventh rounder, but it's a guy they liked, a guy they brought in for an interview. Must have been something in the interview that they really liked about him. 4-year starter, he has experience. I know this is the big thing that's been coming out of it, but Will Levis sat behind the guy. He beat out Will Levis for 2 years before Levis transferred to Kentucky. So what's that? That tells me that either A, Will Levis really sucks, or B, this kid's got a little gamer to him. And let's face it, he's not going to see a start unless something happens to Jordan. So what's the harm in drafting him? Let him get some of the LaFleur QB school, let him learn, and if nothing else, you trade him for a future draft pick. Let him get a few years under his belt, or let him develop and be the next Doug Peterson or Craig Nall or whatever. So, I have no problems where I really have. It's not going to be a surprise. I have no real problems with any of the picks that were taken by the Packers in this year's draft. Where they took them, what positions they took, no issues. So, I mean, are there guys that I wish they would have took instead? Sure. But I have my guys. And like Dusty kept saying, that this is the reason why he doesn't do draft stuff, because he falls in love with guys and then the Packers don't take him and then he feels upset about it. So it happens. But, I have no problem. I really like the Clifford pick in a way just because that shows me they stuck to their guns. They really liked what they heard from him. He presented himself well. They liked the tape. It's a Packer guy. That's who they wanted. They had no qualms taking him.
Yeah, I echo that. I love the Clifford pick, man. I feel like nobody in the world besides me did, except for apparently you now. So, I thought it was. I mean, yeah, like again, we're upset that we took him in the fifth because why? Because Johnny from PFF had him in the seventh round,
Yeah, no kidding,
or
right?
Timmy from Twitter had him on draft. Like, who cares? That's not our draft board. That's not. We have no idea, right? Gutekunst could have had him as a sixth round guy, and that's it. And that's what we really have to be putting, at the forefront of this. But also, um, I mean, you kind of stole my thunder because you brought up a lot of really good points with Clifford.
I
The
do
Levis
that.
thing is huge. We're talking about, yeah, a 4-year starter at a Big Ten school with a lot of prestige. I know it's not always, it's had its ups and downs, but a 4-year starter, 4-time captain of the team. I mean, that's huge. I see in the Clifford pick, this is the perfect quarterback room guy. This is the
Yep.
perfect guy to have in your quarterback room. This is the perfect guy to have holding the clipboard, to have helping Jordan Love. He's a student of the game, extremely smart. He's a versatile athlete. You brought up another great point. The dude's probably never going to see a snap. That's okay. Like, let him play some preseason, let him have some fun, let him be a little bit of a Taysom Hill-ish type guy. But he's not going to be the quarterback. And you know what? If Jordan, Sanjay brought up, well, what if Jordan Love gets hurt? Well, you think that we're just
Our
going to say,
season's
Clifford, you're the
screwed
guy?
anyway.
Yeah, our season's done, and we're probably going to go try to find a vet, right? We're not going to go look and be like, Clifford, figure it out. So I love the idea. I love bringing him in. I think he's a culture guy, a big time culture guy. I think he's exactly what you want in that quarterback room with Jordan Love to help him grow. Um, I've talked to a lot of different players and former quarterbacks that have gone through there, and it's the quarterback room is huge. It's a super important room to have, and I think with getting rid of, I say this lightly, but maybe a little bit of that toxicity that left the New York Jets. That's a different room, right? So it's Jordan Love's room now, and who you want to have guys in there that are going to help build him up, help him kind of figure things out, help him kind of grow with his film. So yeah, I love him. I thought you brought up a lot of really good points on Clifford, especially the Colby Wooden thing. Same, echoed the exact same things you guys thought. I mean, inside outside guy. I think he's um, a unique project. We've always done really well in the fourth round, so I'm actually feeling like, part of me feels like, I don't know, but then again, it's like, well, we've done really well in the fourth round. So there's something that's probably there. Playing at Auburn obviously is a big deal. So have him be at that type of a school at that type of level. He's clearly got some skill. I'm just very interested to see where they see him, right? Where does he fit in this defense? So that's kind of where I'm at with him. And then I love Dontavian Wicks, right? I don't know if it's the name, right? I think that's like, it's like the guy that's like I played Madden when I was 10 years old, and I named all my receivers like Dontavian, Devontae, Dontarius, like they're all cool names like that. I've always said that Devontae Adams was literally the guy I created on Madden, right? Like the dreads, the visor, the cool gloves, the cool, off color like shoes. He was that guy. But Dontavian Wicks, here's my thing with him is everyone's going to focus a little bit on that, the speed and things like that. But he seems to have football speed, right? When you
Right.
watch the tape, it's not electric, but he's moving in the right direction at the right time. He's got the right movement, the right hip placements. And I feel like that's a really big deal. If you watch, to go back to him, Devontae Adams, right, at Fresno State, we're not talking about an electric speed guy. We're not talking about somebody that was absolutely blowing away in the tape. Him, Wicks feels very similar to that, and I think he's that kind of guy that will come into the season, as that like number 4 guy, um, and we could see him kind of progress. The other thing that's really kind of in his favor is he doesn't have Aaron Rodgers throwing him the ball,
Yeah.
because Aaron Rodgers probably wouldn't throw him the ball.
No kidding,
So we
right?
have this opportunity now where we're going to start seeing these guys really get more opportunities. And so that kind of intrigues me, because if we are going to spread the ball around, there's going to be plays where Wicks needs to be there. And I think he's good enough to definitely make those plays and make those guys miss. So I'm actually super hyped for that pick.
Yeah, and the kind of like the reason why I mentioned like Gmo especially is just because he has that thing on tape where like sometimes he just makes really dumb mistakes, or he gets open and just doesn't really finish, and then out of nowhere he'll make the most like ridiculous like toe tap catch, like the ball has like half a meter worth of space, and he's just like totally effortless. I think he's one of those guys. If he like yeah, if he gets it together, he'll like you'll see that out of him. It'd be like maybe probably never see more than like 40 or 30 catches out of him a year. But when he does, you'd be like, oh my God, like, where's he been? I think he'll pop
Yeah,
like, eventually.
Well, that's why I
yeah,
also
definitely.
mentioned the Lazard comp to him too, because
Yeah,
Lazard came out not having, quote unquote, not having top speed, but he had, like Fred said, football speed. He had game speed, and he wasn't always the most reliable when it came to catching either. So I could see him being the new version of Lazard. So I'm not against it. I don't know. It's going to be, this is really going to be an interesting year when it comes to the wide receiver room. You got Watson, you've got Dubs, you've got Torre, now you got Jaden Reed and Wicks, and we'll talk about him here in a minute, but that Dubose, and then the Packers are going to they brought in at least one UDFA, the kid from Ole Miss, Malik Heath. The Packers. Uh, I keep hating to pile on this, but it seems the Packers tend to bring in some good guys at wide receiver. They just didn't seem to get used with the past now former quarterback. So it's going to be interesting to see what Jordan will do with these guys. And like the big thing is everybody's been talking about, the middle of the field is going to be wide open now.
yeah,
Mm.
So
Actually, yeah,
yeah. And I think Wicks will be a little bit of a project. So I hope they're patient a little bit with that one,
mm,
because I don't necessarily see him like bursting onto the scene. He could, that'd be fantastic. I'll take that all day. But he seems like somebody that could take a good, like this year will be a very much of a learning year for him. So I hope it doesn't he doesn't get shelved for that.
mm.
I don't think they will. I think Goot is usually pretty loyal for a couple years with the receivers.
unless he starts
Um,
fumbling 9 times in 4
Absolutely. If he
games,
fumbles,
then
then he can go. I don't care. I hate people who fumble. That's like my biggest pet peeve in the world.
Mm.
Um, yeah, when I was as a kid, right, when I was growing up, if I fumbled it, uh, we would have to do push-ups, and then my dad or my grandpa would tie a string around the ball and make me run around, and they would yank on the string until I would not drop the ball.
I
That
thought you were
was
going
like
to
a
tell me they
huge.
gave you a loaf of bread and told you to carry that around school for the whole day.
No, no, no. It was a lot worse. It was, yeah, they would just yank on this ball on my arm. It hurt so much sometimes. But yeah, I'm a prime believer, firm believer, not prime believer, firm believer of you don't drop the ball ever. But yeah, I mean, I think that you're right. I think this receiving core is super unique. Nobody's been here more than 2 years, so that's a trip, right? And it kind of, similar to a little bit what we're going to see with the tight end room as well, right? Like it's kind of figured out. Like you want to play, go play. Like it's nobody's spot is guaranteed. I don't think that, I mean, Watson is really the only one that I think you can make a case for. And even
Maybe
still then,
Dubs.
I'm not, yeah. And I'm not even, I don't know if I'm even going to, stand and say, hey, Watson's your clear number one, right? I think he is because of just obviously his production last year. And I think we all, hope, like we want to think that that's going to be the situation. And when Dubs was there, the flashes were great, but there were still injuries. There were still injuries with Watson. We all know about the sophomore slump with receivers, so you
Yep.
can expect there's going to be a little bit there. Hoping that there's not, but there's just really for me, there's no guarantee of like, hey, this is the guy, number one, solidified guarantee. So it's kind of a free for all in that receiver room, and I'm kind of excited to see, like that fight, right? Because it's going to be kind of a brutal battle between all those guys, because all of them are going to want the spot, and there's no number one. There's no Devontae Adams, and then everybody else. It's who wants it, who wants to be on that field,
And there's no vet. There's not that 29-year-old
right?
vet that, oh, well,
There's
I'm
no
not going to beat
vets.
that guy out. technically you could call Christian and Dubs, our vets because they have 1 year under their belt. That's
Yeah.
1 year more than the rest of them have under their
Yeah.
belt. So, but I mean, there's not that 29-year-old over there that, oh yeah, we're not going to beat him out. So he's the clear guy. So it's just amongst us. These guys that were just drafted this past weekend, that's they could beat them out theoretically. You
I
know,
mean, for sure.
let's say Jaden Reed just goes off. I could see him being ahead of Dubs or ahead of Watson by the end of the year if he just goes off. And it's also the other thing, and like I said, I don't want to keep piling this on, but you got to at least hope Jordan has had a better chemistry with some of these guys than what Rodgers would have
No,
because of the scout teams and the stuff like that.
it's a good point, and um, I think that's what I'm most excited about is to be able to see Jordan Love grow, right? With these
Right.
receivers. He gets to grow with these tight ends. When Rodgers came in, a lot of those guys were kind of in that same age, right? There was
Yeah.
obviously DD was a lot older, but like, the Jennings, the Jones, like they weren't crazy difference. It wasn't like, when you had Watson come in at 20, whatever, 21, 22 years old, and you have Rodgers who's 37, right? I mean,
Right.
that's such an awkward gap. And
Yeah,
whereas
Nick,
these
that's an
guys,
awkward gap.
yeah, there's such a like potential, right, for these guys to be friends, to really like play for each other. So I'm excited to kind of see how that kind of goes, and then just to see who kind of fills in the spots. I think also in today's game, we talk a lot about number ones and number twos. I don't know. Like, I don't know if I always buying into that, right? I think there is some circumstances where there's obviously a clear kind of number one guy. Um, but I think there's a little bit more of a committee type situation. And I think that's kind of what this offense is under the
Well,
floor.
that's always been the Packers' way. They've never, up until Devontae's the last few years, the Packers never really had a clear cut number one. They just had a group of really good guys out on the field that this guy 1 week was number one, but then the next week, this guy was number one. 1 week Greg Jennings was number one, the next week Jordy Nelson was number one.
Yeah.
The Packers always had that great group, and it just seemed like it tailed off there towards the end of the Rodgers tenure, that they didn't keep replenishing that group with the picks like they did before. But anyway, we've got two more rounds to go through, and these were our busiest rounds.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah. So
we gotta let Fred go because he's gonna pass out here pretty soon. He's gonna turn into a pumpkin.
yeah.
Or a
Yeah.
gremlin.
So
No water.
round 6, Carl Brooks out of Bowling Green, Anders Carlson out of Auburn, and the 7th round, the 4 picks: Carrington Valentine out of Kentucky, Lou Nichols out of Central Michigan, Anthony Johnson Jr. out of Iowa State. Thanks a lot, Joe. And Grant DeBose out of Charlotte. Now, this was kind of like, this is my second favorite round of this draft. I just like the 7th round was just such a great way to address, like running back 3, cornerback depth, and like getting Anthony Johnson Jr. in the 7th was just like unreal.
Oh yeah.
And me and Joe always joked about how he was mocked in the first when the whole draft process started.
Yep.
People were like, yeah, take him ahead of Brian Branch. I'm like, well, yeah, let's just relax a little bit. But the 7th round is like, man, that's like incredible. He's a guy who could legitimately start for this team. I would not be surprised at all. I would almost expect him to be at least safety 2, if not just for the pure lack of bodies there at safety. And Grant DeBose is just like another one of these guys who's like, I'm not sure how he lasted to the 7th round. And he just like, he's a technician. He understands how to play receiver. He's smart. And I find it like difficult to see him not making this wide receiver roster. And if he's on the practice squad, I mean, that's like the perfect practice squad receiver. I really love what they got here. And even like Carrington Valentine, he's another one of these guys who has the ability. I mean, he's like, a man corner, whatever that really means in today's NFL. He kind of like specializes in that like press cover, but he also has versatility. He has the size that they're kind of looking for there. And it's just like it's a seventh round corner. It's like it's a lottery ticket at this point. Um, the only pick that I really didn't like in this draft was the kicker out of Auburn. I just like he was one of the kickers that I just really didn't like very much at all. And it seems like he's kind of like a Bisaccia pick. They're kind of just like pick a kicker,
He's
anyone,
definitely
and
a Bisaccia pick.
yeah, and like maybe he's right. I'm not gonna like hope that he's bad or say that he's going to be terrible. I just don't really see any reason that we should have drafted him. Um, but I mean, we'll see. There is like I think one of the more underrated and forgotten about position battles for this year's Packers team is the kicker position. We have 3 or 4 kickers on the roster at the moment.
I think
Between
only 2.
well, because we have Carlson, Parker White, and there's another UDFA kicker. I think we grabbed, right.
Oh, did they just sign one? Because I was going to say, I don't think that who's the one last year that went out and did a kickoff and then injured himself and was out the rest of the game?
Ramez Ahmed.
Yeah, there you go. I don't think he's on the roster anymore. Of course,
Right.
Mason's not there anymore, and I knew
No.
about the that what was his name, Parker White, and then I know Anders is there.
I thought that we had another like UDFA body kicking around.
They might have brought somebody in because I think it's this weekend is their rookie mini camp.
Yeah.
But without looking it up, I don't. The only 2 that I know off the top of my head are White and Anders.
Yeah.
But honestly, the one that I'm most excited about out of all those is Valentine out of Kentucky, because the stuff that I've been hearing from people is if he lives up to his talent, he's gonna be the next star. It just, if he can live up to it, he should have been taken higher. But
he's
everybody
really
was surprised.
I love how physical he is on tape.
So it just, I'm looking forward to that one. Carl Brooks is interesting because I'm seeing a lot of comps to Mike Daniels. Now, obviously, I'm going to like Mike Daniels, one way or the other. But really, Mike Daniels was a hell of a leader for the Packers team for many, many years, and to be comped to a guy like that, that's a lot of shoes. That's some big shoes to fill. Anders, I don't have a problem with. I know they said that a lot of his issues last year was injuries. I have a feeling what this is Bisaccia said, well, I worked with his brother in with the Raiders. I pretty much fixed him. I think I can fix Anders too. Maybe there's a connection there. Otherwise, maybe Anders worked with his brother. I can't. What's his brother's name? It's Dan, right? Dan Carlson.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe they had like a special team school in the off season, and Anders was working with Bisaccia and his brother, and Rich really liked what he saw out of him. Again, they know more about this stuff than we do. Obviously, it wasn't taking Jake Moody in the 3rd round.
So
obviously,
such a stupid pick.
Well, don't tell Rich Eisen that. Rich Eisen loved it. But they needed to get somebody. That's the end of it. Mason, I love Mason to death. Mason been there for a long time, but there was definitely an issue last year. Was it because of the back issue that he had the surgery on? Was it just because he's just getting plain too old? You figure kickers can last for a while, but when they do last for a while, they're not that long-range kicker anymore. Adam Vinatieri, one of the best kickers there's ever been for the longest time, you didn't ask him to kick 60-yard field goals in the snow and the wind and the rain and everything else. The Andersons back in the day, Fred, you remember Morton and
Morty, yeah.
And what was the other Anderson? There was Morton and come to me later. But they both kicked till they were almost 50, and so they can last a while, but they're not going to be kicking from 50, 60 yards. So even if we did bring Mason back, he wasn't going to be that reliable guy that he was 10 years ago from 55 yards with the wind blowing in his face and snow piling higher than his ass. And
Yeah, I think, and I don't want to say as well, like in Carlson's interview when you first got drafted, he mentioned that he was like uncomfortable with the weather, which to me is like, oh, a bit of like J.K. Scott flashback situation. I'm like, oh. But
yeah, but who isn't uncomfortable with the weather in Green Bay, Wisconsin when it's the middle of December?
I mean, yeah, but it still matters though. It still matters if it's something that he's never played in before, never showed that he has the ability to
Who was
consistently
the
kick
other
in.
one that the
It's like,
Packers drafted from a warm school or a college in a warmer weather that said he had never even seen snow before until he was drafted by the Packers?
oh yeah, I remember that.
And and they can adjust. I mean, I don't think the Packers are going to take him if they didn't think he was going to be able to adjust to it. So, but anyway, the rest of the group, Lou Nichols, even though I wasn't, that's right, Nichols, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. For some reason, I was thinking it was wrong, but I wasn't high on him like all of the other guys are. But I'm not going to say anything against it because he's going to be RB3 right now unless he absolutely blows off and you know. But like I kept telling people all weekend, running back was a high need too because Aaron's not getting any younger, and who knows what he's going to be doing next year. AJ's on the last year of his contract. Even though he's a great Packer personality, he hasn't really showed on the field too much. Do they move on from him? Does he take a cheap deal? Who does he take the money and run from another team? Who knows? And as much as I love Tyler Goodson isn't going to be a lead back in the league. He's going to be, a rotational type guy. So they were going to have to take one way or the other. I had some other guys I'd rather take, even though I heard that it's come out that Ty Spears has like no cartilage in his knee anymore. So his career's not going to be, according to many, this is not going to be long in the league. He's got like no ACL and no cartilage. So he's on a short leash for his career. But I'm not going to, I don't have anything to say against it. Dubose is the interesting one. Small school guy. Charlotte definitely is not a big school by any means at all. But he sounds like that feel good story, kind of like the Donald Driver type story where he came up from nothing. He was working all kinds of odd jobs during COVID just to, make his way. And then he gets a shot with Charlotte and just goes off, and he's got athletic trait on top of athletic trait. I'd hate to put the stigma on him about being the next Donald Driver, but he's got that feel good story like Driver did. And if he can go come into the league and just dominate and have a 10 to 11 year career, that would just be amazing. And then of course you got the Cyclone. I mean, I suppose I better talk about him, Anthony Johnson. I have nothing against him. He's a good player. I think he transitioned from cornerback to safety, so he's got a little bit of versatility to him. And like Nick said, many people had him mocked going way higher than he did. And let's face it, he's got some big shoes to fill too, because he's got that number 36 riding on his back. And, you got Leroy and Nick Collins looking over your shoulder saying, hey, boy, you better be rocking that 36. You better be treating it pretty good or we're going to be coming for you.
Vernon Scott looking over his shoulder.
Vernon Scott and what was the other? There was one other. Didn't Gunther wear that one too? Ladarius Gunther.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
So
that's big shoes.
Yeah, big shoes. At least we don't have to worry about Julio anymore. So no, I mean these last few draft picks were great. Obviously, I hate to use this euphemism, but you're basically just throwing shit against the wall and hoping something sticks. And that's pretty much what the Packers did here is they had numerous late round picks. We joked about it that they seemed to have like 107 round picks or seventh round picks. So it was just basically throwing it against the wall and hoping something sticks on the roster. But the way it sounds, a lot of the guys that they picked up, they they shouldn't have been there where they were drafted. They should have went a lot higher. So I'm excited to see what they have to say about it. And now that I've rambled on and on and on, you guys can go ahead and go.
No, you're good. I love the way this draft ended. I mean, I thought it was fantastic. I thought they hit a lot of really good needs and they sniped a lot of good players. You guys hit a lot of really great points. I think the Dubose thing, yeah, I think you could definitely see somebody that will definitely, come in and be a special teams guy, will be a camp guy. He will probably be, I would guess, um, maybe the training camp, darling, if you will, this year. I
Yeah.
think that's what everybody will be kind of hyped for him. Um, Mostly because I don't think we have a white receiver to hype like we usually do.
I don't know. I haven't
Um,
seen the rookie
it's-
mini camp yet.
yeah, I feel like that's how that always is, right? White receiver from a small school. Um, but I'm gonna go back to again, like just the receiver thing. I feel like for the last, I don't know, maybe 10 years, we've kind of just known how receivers were going to pan out, right? We've had a good idea because we knew who was throwing them the ball. I feel like it's such a open ended situation now with Jordan Love, right? We don't know who he's going to choose to throw the ball to. We don't know how he's going to throw the ball to them. So any one of these guys could just come out of nowhere and take off and become, a superstar receiver. Obviously, a guy in the seventh round is a little bit more of a far shot, but I think he has the opportunity. The Anthony Johnson Jr. thing I think is great. He could have a chance to step in pretty much immediately and play, which is a crazy thought process. But considering that, at this exact moment, our safety room is pretty garbage. I still do think they bring back Adrian Amos, and I think that's an absolute necessity. But it wouldn't shock me to see him come in and fight for a position. And I honestly think the 36 on his back is a little bit of a foreshadowing of what he's going to do. I think he's going to be good because he has to wear that. I don't know. There's something about it. Just kind of gets me hyped. I love the Lou Nichols pick. I think that's a sneaky good pick. I think if not anything, it gets those other two guys that are currently in the running back room to kind of bolster themselves. But let's not forget Lou Nichols. I mean, was a pretty substantially dominant running back last year, or 2 years ago, if you will. I mean, MAC Player of the Year. I think he had like over 2,000 all-purpose yards, like 1,800 or so, maybe as just in just running and rushing. So, I mean, a guy that was just dominant, and then lost two of his tackles early on in the draft last year. So he kind of just, I know a lot of people are saying like why they were wondering why he didn't come out of the draft last year. I think that he would have been probably in that third, fourth, fifth round type situation. So to get him in the seventh, I think he's maybe got a little bit of a chip on his shoulder, a little bit of I'm going to prove you guys. So I'm excited to see him kind of play. Carrington Valentine, I mean, dog, right? Like absolute dog. I can't wait to see him. I think he's going to jump into that room with Jair and Stokes, and it's going to be just dog, right? Like swagger dogs. You're talking about a guy who played in the SEC, Kentucky. I mean, he lined up, got in people's faces. I think that could be super fun to watch those guys in that backfield, or in that secondary. Sorry, and it just comes down to really whether or not they play press man or if they decide to play 30 yards off the receiver
Yeah,
like
no
they
kidding,
seem to
right?
always do to
What's
start the
press
season.
man again?
Yeah. And then when we play it, it's super successful, but we should continue to just line up 20 yards off of the receivers.
I know that's weird how that
Especially
works,
like,
right?
yeah, do it for Jefferson too, because he doesn't understand zone defenses. Um, the Carlson thing, right? Like, I don't know. He's a kicker, right? Like, I mean, whatever. Like, I mean, either it's going to be cool, it's going to be great, or we're going to all look back on this and be like, okay, a kicker. We didn't get a kicker good and he sucked, whatever. We've seen enough of that. But the ultimate thing is, Crosby is at that last little bit. So to bring in, some 6'5", beast at kicker will be hilarious to watch. And I don't know. I mean, who cares? I don't know if he's going to be good or not. We'll never know.
You'll never know
The
until it
weird thing is
happens.
the weird thing is we've had a really big, long luxury stretch of having a great kicker. And being at the NFC North, we've seen how that can go the other way. With Chicago, Minnesota, I mean, some of them just having brutal kickers and losing brutal games. We've never had that. So that's the one aspect of it where it's like crap if it doesn't turn out and we just have to like cycle through random, kickers. It's going to be kind of a pain in the butt, but, let's just score touchdowns. We don't have to worry about it. Um, and then lastly is Carl Brooks. I feel like, I went backwards on this, by the way.
All good.
Carl Brooks, I feel like, seems to be a decent amount of hype around the guy. Seems to have a really good, skill set. Again, it's an interesting one because of the school, right? Bowling Green, you're not really like tough competition, but seemed to be a stud. I think he led the team in sacks every year in Bowling Green. I'm pretty sure. It wasn't crazy numbers, but still to just be at that pace is pretty impressive. It's just another one of those things that, I for me going into the draft, um, as unpopular as it might be, there was a lot of glaring needs on that defense, right? In the edge and then on that defensive line, we needed to kind of shore up some guys that we can see going into the future. Something I always say is we always think about this year. That front office is already in 2026,
Yeah,
right?
no
They're
kidding.
they're thinking way ahead of us. They've got everything planned out. And that was such a funny thing because we are so kind of naive about it. We're like, wow, we got to get this year and this year and this year. And it's like, no, they're planning ahead, right? They're already thinking, who are we going to have to, be there if Kenny Clark leaves? Or who are we having to be there if, let's say, Rashawn Gary doesn't want to take on that third contract. So they're way ahead of us. And I think these are guys that they 100% have, to come in, be a body, and then they can work on and kind of get going. And you could see, a Brooks coming in about 2 years and being someone that's an absolute starter. So I don't think a lot of necessarily full-fledged starters, but guys that have a lot of upside to them. More so than in years in past where I feel like we've drafted guys late in those late rounds and it's just kind of been like, that's like seems like a good special teams guy.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, no
I've
kidding.
never been like I've never been that excited or been like, yeah, he has a shot. It's always kind of like, yeah, he'll probably be a really good special team guy and practice squad will really get a bolster in the practice squad, like
He'll fill the depth.
yeah, he's just filling that
Yeah.
spot, so where these guys I really do like, man, and a big one is that Valentine and that Nichols, I think are going to be two guys that we actually do see on the field this year. Um, we don't know how Stokes will come back, so Nichols might kind of fill into that position.
Yeah, and
And
we
then like
still have no idea what Stokes's full injury was either.
I know. And
And
it's
that's
kind of weird.
super
And you
weird.
never know, like, and there's always that lag, right? Everybody's always like, same thing with like Rashawn Gary. Everyone's like, well, if he comes back middle of the year, we'll be good. It's like, well, okay, his body might be good, but like
Yeah,
he still has to get into football time. He has to get into football speed. He has to get into like, it just doesn't, they don't just plop back and snap their fingers and boom, they're midseason ready, right? I mean, we see a lot of teams, it takes 4 or 5 games for guys to even get going. So, even if he doesn't come back till week 7, he could end up being week 12 before we actually see the Rashawn Gary that we all expect. And then not only that, if he comes back and say he does have a lackluster like 2 or 3 games, it's a confidence thing.
yeah,
And the guy starts feeling like, oh crap, I lost a step, I'm not good enough. And they get in their heads, let's be honest, they are pro athletes, but they're still people and they still go through all that same stuff. So that being said, I really also really like the Nichols thing, just because I think that running back room is very small and he has every right to battle AJ Dillon for that spot. Uh, like you said, great guy, we all love him for who he is, but the last year was rough. It was not at all what I think any one of us were expecting to see AJ Dillon do. Aaron Jones is electric. I really hope to see him in an actual LaFleur offense because
yeah.
I think what he's supposed to do versus what he was used to do last year or the last 5 years really, is super ridiculous. I mean, you look at what his 3 best games, I think all 3 of the games he had over 10 receptions. He's a receiver. He's got receiving talents to him, right? Now he obviously, technically is a running back, but I think he is an absolute threat as a receiver coming out of that backfield and even motioning out to the slot. And that's where I like, that offense of like you put Nichols in there, Nichols and Jones behind Love. You got DeGuara lined up. Olison lines up back in the backfield. Jones gets motioned out. DeGuara goes this way. You have so many dudes who can just play so many kind of different positions. So I'm excited for that. But yeah, for me, it's 100% Nichols. It's 100% Valentine. I don't know enough about Anthony Johnson, but I feel like it just makes sense, right? It's one of those guys you're just kind of like, and I know you're gonna hate that joke because it's Iowa State, but
Yeah.
it's just one of the, you know what I mean? Like, there's always that guy you're just like, I don't know, it just feels like everything fits. I can envision seeing that name on that jersey for the next 10
Mm-hmm.
years. And that's kind of where I'm just gonna lay him at. But yeah, I love the way they ended that draft. I thought it was fantastic, and I think there's a reason why a lot of the pundits, if you will, gave us a good grade is because we got good players, good depth, and guys at positions that we really desperately needed, right? They didn't go anywhere else that they didn't need to go. They went for things that we really need to fill. Not only, for this year, but for the years going forward. So I don't know. Goody, in my mind, killed it. We'll see, right? In 2 years, we might look back on this and be like, wow, we were absolutely wrong about every one of those. We were terrible. That team, that was the
That's
worst draft ever.
horrible.
Worst draft. But it doesn't feel that way. I feel like he did a really good job, and we got some decent talent there. And yeah, I'm pretty excited for it.
Well, and this is a strange one this year because even Daniel Jeremiah was saying he really loved what the Packers did in this year's draft. Not only with the
Yeah.
number of picks that the Packers had, but what they did with those picks. And
Yeah.
every time I hear him have an interview and they ask him about who he thought had the best draft, he keeps bringing up the Packers. And I don't remember a draft where I heard people talk about it like that. Usually it was always just putting the Packers draft down because, oh, we didn't take a receiver in the first round for Rodgers, or we didn't do this, or we didn't do that. And
Yeah, it's always been a Rodgers-based evaluation, which I feel like has always been super lame. And I think that proves that this year, I mean, this team, they weren't looking at it like, what do we do to keep Rodgers, or what do we do to, make him better? It's like, oh, well, what are we gonna do to make the team better? And I think they saw that.
and one final thing I got to say for this draft, and then I got a question for both of you, but I think that's why the Packers passed on JSN in a way. Because could you imagine the stigma of taking
Oh yeah.
Jackson Smith and Jigba at number 13 the year that the Packers traded? Now, I would have thought it was funny. I've said this whole way through, Nick can attest to it, that I've said the whole way through that I just would have found it hilarious if the Packers would have got a first round pick for Rodgers and immediately flipped that into a wide receiver in the first round. It would have been hilarious, but could you imagine the stigma against JSN had he been chosen at number 13 the year Rodgers was traded? I think it was
It
Westerndorf
would have
that
been insane.
I think Westerndorf brought this up that um, Ted Thompson traded the pick that they got for Favre
Yeah.
because he said he didn't want that player to have that Favre stigma on him for the rest of his career. I think that same stuff would have happened to JSN had he been chosen at 13. And though he would have been a good pickup, I think that's probably why Goody kind of said, no, if we're going to do it, we'll wait till next year when there's a much deeper class or, a much more first round talent class and go from there. But yeah, I think that's part of the reason why JSN didn't go to the Packers at 13.
Yeah, but also like I think the fact of like Lucas Van Ness has one of, if not the highest ceiling of any edge rusher in this class,
Right.
and if they had picked JSN at 13, their edge rushing options in the second round would have been greatly diminished. Even as raw as Van Ness is, he is still a bona fide first round prospect. JSN is a borderline first round prospect. It's the desperation. I mean, he went at 20, right? Like he was by no means the most surefire, dominant, clear cut number one receiver. Obviously he's productive, and I think he was my favorite. But if Johnston had a better three cone, he might have been taken by the Packers at 13. Like,
Yeah.
he in previous classes he would have been probably wide receiver 3 or 4. It's like I think I would have loved JSN, but I just think the reception was just so ridiculous. Like, oh my god, how could you pass on him? I mean, personally, I thought Christian Gonzalez would have been a cool pick. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, just like the whole like receiver infatuation thing is just so like weird. Like, yeah, like that's the Packers. They do smart things, and they have a very very good track record drafting in the first.
Yeah. So
Well,
here's my final. Oh, go ahead, Fred.
I was just gonna say my thing with JSN is, everybody was so hyped on him, and I'm not saying he's not a great receiver by any means. Don't get me wrong when I say this, but like he also lined up on the field at one point with Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Marvin Harrison Jr. Like you had the number one pick throwing you the ball. You have offensive linemen that are great. Like again, that's not taking away from his talent because he's clearly good and obviously he got the ball and things like that. But that to me like was somewhat of a shadow, right? If you're gonna like that could be just as much of a shadow on the flip side with Reed coming out of Michigan State, right? It's a complete opposite. Like I would bolster him due to that as opposed to whatever. Um, so again, I think he's going to be great, and I think he'll do fine. Um, but that was something that I kept coming back to was like, you know, would he be okay with just being the number one guy? I mean, like, did he get better looks because you have other talent? I mean, Marvin Harrison Jr. is better than he is, right? Garrett Wilson was it was better. Olave was better. So it kind of felt like, you know, like was he just the match that happened to be there for this year because he was the only guy that had good numbers,
Yeah.
but was it really fair because he was on a team that was so stacked?
Well, and I said that had he came out last year, he'd probably been a second round pick because he
Oh,
he
probably
he wouldn't have
third.
never beat out any of the ones that went into the first round last year. So, but here's my final question for you, and then, like I said, we'll get you going because we kept you longer a little bit than I figured we were going to. But there was a lot to go through with this post
Yeah,
draft
it's good.
chat. But now it's going to sound weird, but I want your draft grades, but not on how you think they're going to do in this year, but how you felt about the picks when they happened. You kind of get what I'm saying, where how did you think they did with what they were getting, what they were drafting with everybody else that was sitting on the board when they drafted. I'm not going to say, okay, well, they didn't take Paris Johnson. Well, Paris Johnson wasn't anywhere near where they could pick, so I'm not going to knock them for that. So, what are your draft grades for how the Packers drafted this past weekend overall?
Are we doing by pick or overall in just one
Just
one one grade?
overall, one grade overall. If we did it pick by pick, we'd be here another 2.5 hours.
For me, it's like an A minus A. I mean, there's only really two picks that really affect it, and like we kind of both talked about, it's just like it's kind of negligible how bad they really are. Sean Clifford, like that's just a guy. Anders Carlson, it's a kicker. Literally everything else was great to fantastic value. Um, Jaden Reed, a little bit outside of what we perceive their thresholds to be, but a good player, like a really good player. Yeah, I think anything under a B plus is like kind of unfair. To me, this is like an A minus to an A. I love what they did addressing premium positions once again and actually taking like a meaningful shot at tight end and at wide receiver, actually drafting an athletic tight end for once. We kind of joked heaps
Two.
about yeah, exactly. Like we joked heaps about the Packers aren't going to have anyone to draft because all the tight ends are athletic. They've kind of been backed into a hole where they need to draft someone who can actually run. Like I mean, even like looking back to the most recent high pick was Jay Sternberger, and he was like not a good athlete, and he was like yeah, some people kind of compare like Musgrave to like Gesicki. I think Sternberger was a lot closer to that than Musgrave is, and just a less athletic version. And it's like the upside. Packers love upside. Van Ness, great upside. Musgrave, like sky high ceiling. Tucker Craft, high ceiling. All these guys, they have a lot of potential. The only, yeah, I mean, besides the quarterback and the kicker, the only pick that I'm not really very sold on at the moment is this Colby Wooden, because I just don't know what his role is in the NFL or is for us. He's such an in between body type that I like what he put on film in college, but I'm just not sure projection, like what is he actually going to do for us? 280, 290 inside defensive lineman, not really selling me on a defense that it already struggles with run defense. You're not really selling me very well, and he's not good enough to play on the edge. So I'm just not sure exactly what his role is. But otherwise, yeah, like I said, it's like an A minus kind of draft for me.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I guess if I'm hearing you right, you're saying what would I draft as like the initial reaction?
Yeah, not what you're projecting the draft to be,
Yeah,
but what your feelings were as it
as it
happened.
was happening.
Yeah.
Yeah, as it was happening. I mean, I would probably say if that's the case, then probably like a B. And I say that only because now that I've looked at everything and kind of stepped back, I mean, I think the grade would be much higher, right? I'd be a lot closer where Nick's at, without a doubt. But that at the time, right? Like Jaron Reed, it was like, whoa, like, isn't there somebody else that we could get? Like
Especially after
that one,
passing on
like
Hyatt, right?
yeah, like that one for me was like the first where I was kind of like, what? Like you couldn't find one other dude that like makes more sense. Now that again, I said this earlier, I'm the absolute worst scout on receivers ever, so that actually bodes well for him. So like that one, the Van Ness was something that at the time, was kind of like, ugh, but obviously a big need. And then, going through like kicker, and just the genuine names of the guys were where I'm at my B, right? What we drafted position wise, I think I would go an A because I think we filled every position that we need. Every position that I went into the draft thinking we got to get another back, we got to get a couple corners, we got to get them D-line help, we got to get an edge guy, we got to get receiver, we got to get a tight end. Everything that I wanted or that I thought we needed, we hit. So that's a really good call. But yeah, at the time, just as the names rolled out, as the Bowling Greens came out and the, things like that, yeah, it was kind
Charlotte
of
and
like,
yeah.
wait a second, like, but then it was also like, okay, that's like prototypical Packer stuff, right? Like,
Yeah.
let's go get these guys and that nobody maybe paid attention to, right? Um, so yeah, I would say probably like a B was my initial reaction.
Yeah, and I can completely agree. My initial reaction, I probably would have it a B plus A minus area, borderline on that. But now that I've sat down and I've went through it all, and I've the initial surprise on some picks and the initial love of other picks have kind of settled in. I can say overall there's an A there, but yeah, my initial was B plus A minus. But I'm even stoked about some of these UDFAs that they brought in.
Yeah.
I mean, this is crazy. So it's going to be a fun year. I really look forward to seeing it. I was telling these guys before we started recording, I'm going to be up in OTAs June 8th through the 15th. So I'm going to be up in close and personal. It'll be my first time back in Green Bay since 2019. So it's going to be a great trip. But yeah, I can't wait. Football is just right around the corner. I know we're hitting that lull where we're going to have very little things going on, and then before you know it, it's going to ramp up, and we're going to be knee deep in everything, and it's going to be a fun year. It really is. I'm excited. I'm not predicting it's going to be, a world burner by any means. We're going to get smacked down to earth pretty quick, but I don't think it's going to be as bad as what some other people might think it's going to be.
Yeah,
And
it's not going to be, I don't think it's going to be bad at all in that regard. Like I don't feel like, oh my gosh, it's a complete rebuild. I don't feel like we're, as
right.
Stinky Bach would say, or basically we suck, right? He said the word suck like 5 times and I hated that. I was like, what are you talking about? Um, but I will say this though, real quick, is like, I would say the last 5 years probably, it was really I was getting to the point where I was starting to be like, I just like
Couldn't
can't
handle
keep
it
doing it,
anymore.
man. I can't keep doing like
It's a
I put
lot.
so
Yeah.
much emotion into it and so much stock into it, and it's so important to me and I love it. And so I started like, it was like after every, NFC championship loss or every 13-3 season, you start to just, I was like, I just can't do it anymore. I tell my wife, I'm like, I don't know if I want to even do the podcast anymore. I'm like, I just feel like I can't go through it again. And she's like, well, okay. I mean, just take some time and figure it out. And then the season would start and I'd kind of get excited again. And, you get through it or whatever. Um, but I've got to say, like this, I feel more youthful and energized about this season. Not because I'm like Super Bowl, but
Right.
like because I'm like whole new team, like new offense, kind of like new quarterback, new exciting things to pay attention to. And I think for that, like, we just got to a point where it was like, okay, every year, like Rodgers is a quarterback and our defense is going to underperform and he's going to throw to only three guys and we're going to go through
Avoid the
some bull
middle of the
crap. And
field and only hit
yeah,
the
he's not going to throw to the
edges.
middle of the
And
field and it's always going to be the Rodgers show. And he earned a lot of that respect or that a lot of that right to a degree. Not the whole thing, but to a degree. And, that just kind of got like, just like, can we do something different? And I don't want to sound like I'm not a spoiled fan, right? I mean, I
yeah.
kind of am, but I'm not totally a spoiled fan, but it is kind of, like I think we're all pretty good with the understanding it's a different world and we're a different team and we're all like, this could be super fun, right? Like even if we go 8-9, right? But we have some fun games and we get to like see some players like emerge. Like that's just as good as to me as like going 13-3 and getting my heart broken because we can't seem to, convert when it's needed. So I'm pretty hyped for the season.
Okay, so does here's one for you, and it can be a simple yes or no. Does Jordan Love get the Rodgers treatment from the first year Rodgers took over starting? Does he get booed at family night like
No,
Rodgers did?
No, not at
definitely
all.
not.
No. No, we actually Sanjay and I were talking about that. We were coming back from like a card show or whatever, and we were talking about um I usually always try to go to like the home opener and then
Yeah.
I go to maybe like one or two other games. Just because again I'm old and it's
Can't do those bleacher
expensive and
seats anymore.
well, it's yeah, and it's just expensive and it's like, it's time consuming. I don't know. It's just it can get again, not here I sound like a spoiled brat, but um you know, Nick's over here like I would literally give my left leg, but whatever, that's cool, dude. Just go to whatever ones you feel like going to. That's fine. Yeah, see, I'm
Privilege.
okay.
Check your
I'm
privilege.
totally yeah, privileged, spoiled little brat over here in Wisconsin, no doubt. But that's definitely like I'm excited to see the reaction for that. Because I don't think it will be a boo. I think people will embrace him very much. I think what he's done and the way he's held himself over these last 4 years is super commendable. And like I said, I think everybody was just like it was time. We all felt good about the departure, right? I don't think there's like besides a couple like complete blowhards on Aaron Rodgers, like I think everybody was just like, "Hey, it's time. Like we're good. Like no hard feelings. Let's kind of separate." I think the separation was, minor. There was some drama, but that's obviously going to happen. But I think even both sides both kind of feel like we've gone through the bull crap with the Favre thing. Let's not let it get there, right? Maybe there's a couple miscommunication things, but Rodgers goes, signs a new deal to give us a few bucks. Gutekunst doesn't take that receiver to, like you brought up. I think that, was actually kind of almost as much as it's not against JSN. It's also kind of like could you imagine, right? I mean,
Right.
that would have looked like such a FU to Rodgers and that would have probably stirred up some drama. So I feel like everyone's just kind of like, we'll go our separate ways. Let's keep it real. Like we'll go win, we'll go play, we'll go do our thing. So, I mean, I like kind of that approach to it. And I also got to say that like, for most people, like, Aaron Rodgers is probably going to have a decent year, right? He's got a chip on his shoulder. He's going to play good. He's an incredible quarterback, probably the greatest ever. And there's no reason in my mind that I don't believe he's going to go there and just ball out, right? Because that's what he wants to do, and he's going to. We're not going to probably ball out per se. So I don't want everybody to like freak out about it,
Right.
right? Like I think of like Will Ferrell when he's like in the locker room, he's like on fire and he's like, "No, freak out." But the thing that I keep kind of coming back to when I say that, it's kind of like, have you seen who the Jets have to play this year?
Yeah. Yeah.
That schedule is absolute. I mean, I don't know the exact dates, but who they play It is not. It is like brutal.
Well, you don't even have to look
like,
at
I
the
think they have
schedule
like
to know, because they play the Bills twice a year.
well, right.
They play was it the Steelers twice a year?
Well, they play the Bills, the Dolphins, who the Dolphins are a good team. They got to play
Yeah.
Belichick and the Patriots, who's not going to be a simple game. Belichick's gonna, is super smart. I think they have to play. I think they're playing the AFC West, so they have Kansas City, Chargers, Denver, and I don't. They think they play the Raiders too. They must have to. So I mean, they have like a seriously difficult schedule. I think they have like maybe 2 games. They play like the Texans and like somebody else that's pretty simple.
They play the Chiefs and the Eagles and the
Oh,
Chargers.
Eagles too.
As well as the
Yeah,
as well as the AFC
it's
East. And
going to
that's
be.
like oof.
Yeah, they have an away game. They have like a 4-game away stretch where I think they play like the Chiefs, the Broncos, like in like a couple of, it's like what in the freaking world? Because it's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
So, Nick, is there anything else we need to cover? I mean, I got a whole list of things we could talk about, but again, we'd be here for another 2.5 hours. I mean, there's
No,
stuff
not,
we haven't even touched, but
yeah, I mean, yeah, no, I think there's still 4 months until we even get to football. So I think we have plenty of time to talk about other stuff, and I'm sure we can get Fred on again to cover the rest of his family stories and tell us all more about that good
I don't
stuff.
know. It
But
took me almost a year to get him on this time. It might take us longer the next time.
no,
Well, I mean, it's like way past my bedtime, man. I'm like gonna start getting all loopy and weird and stuff.
no,
I know
yeah,
you're getting punchy. I'm getting the same way, where we just keep going on and on, because if we quit, we're
I
going to fall
know.
asleep.
I know that's my one kryptonite. So also that's the story behind why I started podcasting, 8 years ago, was like something like this, where somebody would start talking to me, or I would start talking about football at home, right? And I would be rambling to my wife, and she would all of a sudden just stop me and be like, "Dude, I don't know what a cover 2 zone is. I don't know what you're talking about. Like, what do you even like? What the slot? What is a slot receiver?" And I'm like, she's like, "You need to find something that you can talk to people about. Like, you need to find a friend or something."
Go get a
And she's like,
friend.
"Why don't?"
Leave me
Yeah,
alone.
she's like, "You should do get like a podcast." And I was like, "Oh, that's a really good idea." She's like, "But you need to find an avenue that you can chatter somebody else's ear off, because you just start talking about football and you get going." And I'm like, "I know, it's a curse."
Yeah. Well, Fred, before we finish up, is there anything of your own work that you want to plug quickly?
No, I don't have anything.
No,
I got
all
nothing.
good. All
I'm
good.
just kidding. No, yeah, make sure you guys tune in to the Freezer podcast Monday nights. Me, Sanjini, and Mixmaster Matt. Always, like to, I don't know, we do weird stuff. Sanjay will shave his head, eat hot chips. We talk about some good stuff. It's good chemistry. We'll have to sneak you guys on one of the shows this upcoming year. That'd be fun.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Works
Yeah.
for
Awesome.
me.
Yeah. Well, as always, guys, you can find us on Twitter. You can find Fred at F Thurston XXII. That's 22. Myself at Nicholas GRGR. Joe at Iowa_Joe86. The podcast at Outback_Packers. Until next time, see you later.